Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stench of Truth radio show here on the Inception Radio Network. I'm your host, Ted Torbich, and I am here every Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. That would be 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific Time, and considering the guests that I have that are all over the world, I guess I could sit here for another 10 minutes and tell you what all the what all the other time zones are, but you can look those up for yourself. So basically, if you're new to the show, I generally talk with authors and researchers on a variety of topics related to mysticism, consciousness research, conspiracies, secret societies, sort of undercurrents in politics, what some refer to as parapolitics, and in general, all the things that are classified as high weirdness as well within the ufological and paranormal environments as well. So if you want to find out more about me and get connected to my material, you can visit my website, which is thestenchoftruth.com. That's all one word, thestenchoftruth.com, and that will link you to all of my social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter, where you can friend me or follow, and also link you to my blogs as well as to my YouTube channel, where I do videos on politics and economics for the most part, but I do touch on some of the things that we talk about here on the radio show as well. So, just to remind you about Inception Radio, we do have several different ways to listen to the radio show. We have apps for smartphones, both iPhone and Android operating systems, which you can find. There are several different ways that you can listen to the show. There is a listen live stream directly from the main page. You just click listen live, and you can get access to a chat room there as well, and that's at inceptionradionetwork.com. And also, there are several alternative streams that you can use as well. There are several different streaming options that are available. And there's also a phone number which you can call to access the phone or access the show via your phone and listen over your phone if you want to do that. And I know some people do. So there are several ways you can listen to the show. And I'm not going to bother you with any more of the housekeeping here. And instead, I'm going to introduce Neil Kramer. First, you can find Neil Kramer, who is my guest this evening. You can find him at neilkramer.com, and that's spelled Neilkramer, neilkramer.com. And he is a writer, philosopher, and teacher. He does workshops with people to help them in their spiritual advancement. He also writes articles, and he writes and contributes to books, as well as doing a tremendous amount of audio, and I'm very glad to have him on the show today to talk with us about some of the material that he has written and spoken about. during his research time. And his latest work is The Unfoldment, and that is subtitled The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And of course, this is all about spiritual growth and consciousness and following the signposts along the way, like synchronicity and other things that the universe sort of throws up in front of us to give us some kind of feedback to let us know that we're on the right path or not on the right path, and things that we need to think about or think twice about if they come before us. But I think I'll just let Neil talk a little bit more about these subjects. Neil, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's very nice to have you on the show, and I could also point people to many hours of audio interviews that Neil has done, and you can find him. Just go to all of the pretty well-known radio shows, radio internet shows, and you can probably find some interviews with Neil Kramer because he's been around, and he's a very vocal spokesperson for the kind of material that he looks into, and I think it's a great honor to have him on the show today. So, Neil, you're going to be having a workshop coming up in August. I wondered if you would like to talk about that a little bit, just to give people an idea about what kind of things they could experience in a workshop with you.
Yes, indeed. I am giving a workshop called Unfoldments, Secrets and Synchronicity. There's that word again. It's August the 25th, and it's just over near Hood River in Oregon, just a little short drive away from there. And essentially, what I do, as you discussed, is philosophy, consciousness, spiritual advancement, self-growth, but also, the shadow sides of things. So we often talk about what I call the distortion, which we can unpack what that means a little later in this discussion. Some conspiracy topics, different kinds of inner and outer technologies, and so on and so forth. And this particular workshop is really a sort of acknowledgement at this time of extreme weirdness in the world, this very surreal world, I find, in a kind of funny way, actually, not in a gloomy way, as almost as if it's like a very odd painting, and you're looking at it and just thinking, what the hell is that exactly? What does it mean? How do I fit into it? How am I supposed to interpret this? And within that view of this reality, there are many fascinating topics to use kind of as filters to look at it. So I'm going to talk about mysticism, magic, sexuality, media, politics, conspiracy, many different things, ultra-terrestrial presence, and kind of show that those things where they overlap, if you imagine they're all kind of circles and you fan them out, where they overlap in the middle is something really interesting, something really unique about this time in our history. And of course it is 2012, so it's not going to be surprising to people to know that people who talk about things like this are going to accentuate the fact that there's a bit more of a shift going on at the moment, not just the usual shenanigans and the usual gear shifts, but something a little grander is happening in the background. And so this workshop is really my endeavour in mapping that to our own personal lives, because as anybody who knows my work will be aware, really, knowledge without application is pretty useless, pretty unexciting. So I make every effort I can to make sure that everything that I talk about can be expressed in one's own personal life, in the real world, in what we do on a daily basis. So I think that's what people respond to in my work more than anything, to think, well, Kramer means it, that's one thing, but he also does it as well, and he shows other people how to do it. So anyone interested in those topics, you can go to my website, click on the events section at the top, and there's a little banner on the side as well, and come along if you're anywhere near, or if you've got the resources to get over here. It's a great way to spend the weekend, and it's kind of Friday, Saturday, Sunday really, and it's a super a super opportunity to gather with other conscious people as well and spend some real quality time looking at these things, talking about them, thinking about them, socializing, and, you know, kind of communing with kindred spirits, really. It's, you know, always a rare treat in this world to do that. And if I can ever facilitate that sort of thing, then I'm always, you know, more than happy to do it.
That's actually really great, because we need more people who are like that, I think. And I think that most people would agree with your assessment that we're seeing something a little bit different than what we've seen throughout history. Because certainly I think you would agree that history has gone in cycles over cycles over cycles. But it does seem as though in our environment today, as you described it, almost being surrealistic and looking at it and wondering, like, what the heck is going on here? It seems to me that it's, you know, visibly different to me viewing reality just, you know, from 10 years ago, say.
Yeah,
or 15 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, it's hard to deny that, isn't it? I totally agree. And I think it's not just the events we see with politics and phenomena and anomalies and, you know, radical social change, not just on the television and on the page, but in our own lives as well, in our own relationships and our own ways of spending our days, whatever we do. I think the theme for me this year, I just spoke about this at a conference last weekend, is how everybody's life is changing, but at greater clip than usual. And I think one of the characteristics of that, which we can say, well, here's something we can use to prove that in a way, is that many people's experience of time is slightly changing, and it seems to be like compacting, if you like. It seems to be condensing in a way, in that more appears to be happening in a shorter space, faster and faster. And of course, you know, our grandparents will tell us that, well, this is what happens when you get old. Things seem to whiz by and you think, goodness me, where have all the years gone? But right now, I think if we just step back and look at our own last 6 to 12 months, whatever we've all been doing, has been an enormous shift, to the extent where you sort of look back and wonder who you were a year ago almost. And you can, you know, draw down some characteristics of that and say, well, I was doing this and I was here and I did this and I worked this job and I was with this person and we did, you know, these various journeys. But what's happening on the inside is also speeding up. And I think people's shift and people's gravitation to what is real is accelerating. So less and less people are prepared to wait anymore for their own, as I call it, unfoldment. They don't really want to read about someone else's. They don't really want to, you know, just listen to someone else's story endlessly. They want to see it in action in their own life. And that is something that I, you know, try very hard to facilitate. And of course, the irony is that, you know, we are listening to people and reading about people right now doing these things, but I am very aware that people want to enable their own power and their own transformation, to say, yeah, I want to be stronger, I want to go deeper, I want to be more fulfilled, I want to express my passion, I want to stop doing the things that are dishonorable, and I want to do it differently. And I think that's very exciting, and I think that's a gift of 2012 to say, well, here you go, folks. This is your opportunity to walk the talk now. We've talked about it for 10, 20 years. We've read about it. Our forefathers have told us stories about this happening millennia ago. But right now, this is a time when it's really, really in everybody's lives. I think it's kind of hard to ignore now. And for some people, that's a little scary, and, you know, it can be a little unsettling, and I appreciate that. And I think that's okay. But more, if you were to balance the two, there's more of an excitement at the new horizons of what's possible now. And I think that people's confidence is slowly increasing. And that's a wonderful thing. So, yeah, I think we can say there's something different going on. We can draw out also, as you say, these cycles of time that our Hindu and Christian and Druidic and European mystical traditions have shared with us, to say, yes, folks, this stuff happens cyclically over many thousands of years, And as a lot of people are saying, there's a big one kind of every 25,000 years, and we're on the eve of that now. But it isn't the end of existence altogether, but it is the end of a certain way of doing things, which I very much welcome, and would almost welcome a little chaotic transition and say, well, you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette, shall we say? I might be eating my words in 6 months, but I would expect that. I would say, yeah, there are going to be some weird, difficult things. There are going to be some ridiculous, psyops pulled on the people, and some silly conspiratorial ignorance being perpetrated here and there. But don't focus on that exclusively. That's only one aspect of a very, very thick and vivid spectrum. Don't focus just on the doom and the conspiracy. There's a lot more interesting stuff going on. So I pretty much won't tolerate just the doomer mentality. I think that's kind of pathetic, and something to be very, very cautious of. We need to know what's going on, but the positives, if you like, the creativity and the power that we can bring forth in our own lives makes that stuff lose its sort of sting, really. You're not quite as worried what the bloody Bilderbergers and the Illuminati and the NSA and MI6 are up to. We're not so worried about those guys. They're trapped in a certain ignorant cycle, trying to desperately hold on to an old hierarchical expression of power, and it's sort of crumbling in the fingertips, really, and they're getting ever more desperate and puny in a way, although the conspiracy sites wouldn't have you think that way. It is quite puny, and it is quite sad in a way, and I pity the consciousness that's trapped in that cycle, because the story is really one of embracing and preempting change, and they're doing the very opposite. They're trying to control it, prevent it, and shape it, and you can never do any of those things. So we always have the upper hand in that respect.
Well, if I may, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I see it from the unfoldment, as you talk about it, the path to clarity, power, and transformation, when an individual is able to get in touch with one's own innate consciousness and express that in creative and energetic ways to sort of shape your own reality, you can't really be touched by any of these people.
Yeah, that's a very, very important observation, and very spot on, if I may say. Your sovereignty, your power, is really what it's all about here, because for a long time we've been forfeiting that in not recognizing our own internal sovereignty, if you like. And let's not mistake that word for anything to do with monarchs, particularly for any European listeners. We're not talking about that. We're talking about real kind of divine total independence, if you like. So it's a knowing deep down inside that you are your own boss. And it's a simple thing, but secretly many people are unsure of owning up to that sort of level of responsibility. And it would kind of be nice if a savior or an ascended master came down into our chaotic, theatre and just gave us the magic keys, gave us the magic book, gave us the special techniques. But if you think about that, what kind of teacher would do that? What kind of teacher would they be if they spoiled the whole game of learning like that? It's rather like a teacher giving his students the answers to the exam paper before they take the exam. It's effective for getting results, but the student learns nothing. So authenticity and fulfillment, really two words that are very resonant for me. They start with knowing that we must, to use a nice English phrase, we must plough our own furrow. And that's the game here, going your own way with your own thoughts, your own expressions, your own insights. And sure enough, along the way, we do find certain methods of clarifying what's going on, of elucidating this path of sacredness. And sometimes those who have come upon this wisdom, which is old and belongs to all of us, they sometimes choose to share it with each other. And we all do this. I do it, you do it, your friends do it, our families do it. But for those who spend a particularly hefty amount of time on these matters, like me, we sometimes find really nice ways of talking and thinking about these things, and that's where the truth of this stuff comes in. A lot of people are interested in truth and call themselves truth seekers. The truth of it comes when you do the work of your own awakening, and it's a joyous thing, and everything else that used to bring pleasure starts to change, because once you've found the truth of your own journey here, and you think, yeah, this is it, this is the real thing, wow, it is deep and exciting and real and penetrating, then a lot of the fear evaporates, a lot of the pull on your anxiety from what the hell's going on here, what's the TV saying, what are the conspiracy, shouting radio hosts saying, naming no names, obviously. What are those people saying? Well, listen to what they're saying if you like, and make some notes of the things that you think are important, but understand that that is only one brief sliver of the spectrum. The rest of it is so bountiful, so abundant, so mysterious, so powerful. Don't be under any illusion that nobody has the whole picture. Nobody, least of all these dungeon masters that we have today, which are, again, rather puny figures, even though they have big cloaks and big claws and big boots, and they're very scary at times. They're only dealing in a very, very small part of the game. And when we see that, we attain this sovereignty, and we detach ourselves from their influence in a very profound way.
Absolutely. And if I might say, it sounds like what you're talking about is sort of the same prescription that the ancient mystery schools would use as well, because the path of enlightenment, according to the ancients, was always one of work and inner work and discovery on your own. And the teacher basically was there just to show you how to go about doing that for yourself, rather than giving you the answers. But I can relate to what you're saying about people awaiting a Messiah or someone to come and give them all the answers and save everything. We've seen this happen, in politics for sure. I mean, look at the kind of thing that happened with Obama in 2008. There was a very strong messianic connection that people were making with him, that he was somehow going to solve a lot of the problems that we had. And there have been other political figures that have fit into that category as well. And so that is one very visible way in which that expresses itself for us to see. But in reality, as you pointed out, it's much more important for people to make the transition and do the work themselves, because otherwise they're never going to realize exactly how to achieve the states that they want to achieve and to experience the things that they want to experience, because someone's just going to put them up on that shelf, and they're not going to have to get the ladder and climb up there and find a place to sit and do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a nice way of describing it. And I think really this word that I use, the unfoldment, that's what it's all about. It's about taking yourself seriously enough to say, hey, I'm not going to treat this kind of conscious, alternative, esoteric subject matter as a hobby. It's not a hobby, it's a way of being. And if I want to keep it as a hobby, then it's always going to have a necessarily subtle and slight influence on things. And I'm going to dip into it in the way that I might dip into a golf magazine or a shooting magazine. It can be fun, there can be interesting things, you can learn some things, but you need to get out there and do it. You need to swing the club, you need to shoot the rifle, and it's just the same with this. So you have to say, okay, this transformation thing, that means me as well, does it? And anyone who's walked this spiritual path, shall we say, for a long time, they already know that. Of course, we know that. But we're always talking, particularly in this format, to many different types of people at all different levels, newcomers, intermediates, advanced, masters, whatever words we want to use. This university of knowledge, of mysterious excellence in our universe that filters through all these different schools, as you say, mystery schools and traditions, and some of them secret, some of them open, some of them exoteric, some of them esoteric. This university, shall we say, there's always classes. There's always entry-level classes, and there's graduates, and there's PhDs and professors, and the university's always there, and people flow through it. And there's always going to be the people who show up picking the nose, not knowing what they're doing on day one. And we have to be respectful to those people. We don't want to turn them away and say, look, get with it, you don't know anything, piss off. We don't want to do that. But we also want to nod and respect our elders in this community, who say there are some people who've been doing this for a long time, and some people who've gone really, really deep and who have some incredible insights which we'd love them to share with us. And we'd love to talk about those things. And I think that's the value of this this very independent mode of broadcasting, that kind of thing that you're doing, and many other people, thank goodness, is that we get to do that. And as you look through the shows and the archives, and you get to, make your own little kind of favourites list of, oh, these are the guys and these are the girls who I really, really resonate with, you will notice as the years go by, that list changes. And the people who used to love 10 years ago, you probably don't anymore, because you've graduated, you've moved on. Doesn't mean they're rubbish. It doesn't mean that this guy who writes about only secret societies is rubbish. It means that's his specialism, that's what he does, and he engages a very important newcomer mindset in a way. And thank goodness that guy's there to inspire new students to this. But we also need to realise that we need this healthy sort of spread of more and more initiation into more and more depth of knowledge. And that, the mystery schools, really, that's all they were doing. They were saying, yeah, there are stages to this process. They're kind of arbitrary, they're not fixed as such, but we can definitely categorise different parts of growth, and there's definitely different sorts of knowledge that we need to keep safe in a way, and we need to protect it and make sure it's respected. We don't just dish it out. We don't just shout it in the park one day to somebody who doesn't know what to do with it. It's something you approach with a certain reverence and a certain discipline, and anyone who has any problems about secret societies and stuff, get over it. There's sometimes secrecy is just about advancement. It's just about protection. And of course, these organisations can be sequestered and co-opted and hijacked and stuff. But in my personal experience, that goes on a lot less than one might think. And when it does, it's pretty obvious. It's pretty, there's an odour to it, shall we say. Very, very ironic for your show. There's an odour to it that we can say, yeah, that isn't right. There's something not right there. I can detect it. And when something's pure, again, we have a sense for that. And you think, well, I don't know why, I don't know everything about this right now, but I have an instinct that this is good. There's a goodness to this. And, trust that instinct and go with it. But always, with these societies and these groups who meet to discuss and share knowledge and wisdom, they're just groups of people getting together. There's no special thing other than that. They're groups of people sitting down together and saying, hey, let's think about the world in different ways. Let's change our perspective. Let's gain insight into what the hell we're doing here. That's all that's going on. That knowledge belongs to everybody. And for those who are interested, it's all there. You just go and put your hands on it. There it is.
Neil, some people have referred to what's going on with society in general as a mass awakening. I know a lot of people have used that terminology. Do you like that terminology? Do you think it's accurate? Do you think it's a little bit, it's much more complicated than just that society itself is being moved in this direction, and it's really, maybe like maybe if I could use a kind of a metaphor, like there's a signal being broadcast, and some people are able to hear it or sense it, and other people aren't. Or do you think that this is something that really is affecting society and in a way that would be akin to something like a mass awakening?
I think with any deception, it only lasts for so long. If you watch the magician do a trick 100 times, you're eventually going to figure out what it is he's doing, how he got the watch off your wrist. You're going to eventually think, hang on a second, I saw it that time, I figured it out, and you realise that things aren't quite the way you used to think they were. And again, it's quite clear now, and I've said this many times, even to very conservative people like my parents or my grandparents or whatever, who, fabulous people, but very immersed in mainstream thinking, if I might say, if they listen, sorry about that. And yet, good people. But even those folks are stopping buying what was happily bought, i.e. the mainstream political illusion of democracy. They're stopping doing that now. And they're starting to realise that there are certain individuals who administer this deception in our world, and they keep us dumb. And it's really just so they can have an easy time of it. There's no greater thing than that, really. It's always happened. And there is this effort to preserve an old form of control that stretches back thousands of years. Now it's with the Americans, it was with the Britons, it was with the Romans, it was with the Egyptians, and you can go way, way back and very esoteric if you want to. And on our journey, we all reach a point where we start to spot the deception. And initially we get obsessed with the deception. And some people, unfortunately, kind of spiral off into this paranoid, fearful world. And that's unfortunate, because that's just a little stage. It's a stepping stone across the pond. You're not supposed to camp out there and spend the rest of your life on that stone. It's a place, a platform for movement. And more people are cottoning onto this, I think. Even those who do consume large amounts of mainstream media. Because the media makes you forget what you're doing and who you are. That's what it's for, really. And to some extent that's okay, because we all do that if we watch a movie to, watch a fantastic Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, and just enjoy that for 3 hours and think, wow, what a great movie, what a fantastic fantasy, a little escape for me for the moment. That's okay. But when it becomes chronic, then you sort of get into trouble. But European and American television, from what I can gather, is so bizarre and so fractured and so inhuman now that even that spell is beginning to sort of wear off. And as I say, this isn't quite as conspiratorial as some might think. In fact, I see it, I perceive it as a gift of shadow, if you like, that helps us come to know faulty ways of thinking. It's like a purposeful fracture in the reality model that gives us a clue that something's not quite right. And it's by identifying and detecting that fracture that we then go on our journey, and we go for what many mystics call this experience with ultimate reality, the real show, the real game. And that's what we start to do. And I think awakening, if we want to use that word, that's fine. I think it's a nice word. More people are awakening to the fact that the world is more mysterious and interesting and deep, and there are more potentials than we'd been led to believe. And that forces people to go on a sort of journey of their own, whether that's in subtle ways or very, very deep ways. And I think that's a good thing. And certainly here in Oregon and California and Washington State, I've seen many, many examples of people embracing that, more so than anywhere else, in fact. But you do, of course, see it everywhere. I've seen it in Britain many times. I've seen it in anywhere you care to mention. But there are pockets of it where people gather more and discuss it more. And that's undeniable. But fundamentally, it can happen anywhere, anytime, in any environment. And it's just here where the control has got to sort of comically, false levels. You just say, look, this is silly, all these funny laws and executive directives and strange facilities and weird nanotechnologies and robots and, it's just like a bad Tom Cruise science fiction movie. And you're just thinking, is this it? Is this the best we can do? Or is this one way of doing it? And I persuade people very happily that that's just one way of doing it. Don't worry. That's only one way of doing it. And their deception is a simple one, which is to make you believe that it's the only way of doing it. And that's not true. That is not true. So gathering together and having this sort of discourse that we're doing now is very important, because we remind ourselves and we give ourselves permission to do it differently. And sometimes we need to do that a little bit to ourselves, and we need to, cowboy up, as they say, together, and we need to support each other and give each other a little bit more energy to do that, because it can be hard if you're totally on your own. It's good to connect with other people to do this thing, because it requires a lot of energy, and that is best sometimes conjured up in groups, in gatherings, even if it's just infrequently, but through the year, you're going to get together in, February and July and September. That can be enough, to have a little tribal gathering, get together, go deep into this stuff together, and then go about your individual solitary journeys. I think you have to have a mix of that.
Yes, I agree completely. And in light of that, I'd like to also ask you, when we look at the so-called sensory reality around us, that we experience through our 5 so-called senses, do you operate from the point of view that what we experience via that mechanism is all an illusion to us, that in reality there is a bigger reality behind that we just, for the most part, cannot access like normally in our sort of daydreaming state that we're in?
The way I think about it is, especially talking to a new audience, that movie Predator? Do you know that movie? With
I know the one.
And then the second one with Danny Glover and stuff. Really good. I enjoyed that. And the extraterrestrial entity in that has this kind of visor, and he can pull this thing to get like infrared, normal light spectrum, or ultraviolet, and he can get these different filters down for hunting purposes, essentially. And sometimes the way I describe it is that we have this particular filter through which we view the world, and we've just forgotten that there are many others. There's just one that we look at. It's like having one type of web browser that interprets the code in one particular way, and there are others, but you forget that, and you habituate yourself to one way of doing things. So it's rather like we've been given one model of reality, and very, very, very much compelled to feel that that's the only one. This is, as it were, the real world. And scientists, particularly reductionist, old school scientists, have done a lot to make that happen. And that's okay, because, they're kind of tracking the clockwork of the world, as it were, to say, well, this is how things fit together, and this is the cause and effect, and this is light and sound and hardness and objects and gravity and acceleration, and we have these ways of measuring it, and we call that science. And that's okay, but it's a very, very thin way of doing it. So really only from the 1920s onwards, these other guys came along and with a new kind of physics and started to say, you know what, the thing we're looking at, and we ourselves, there seems to be an absolute connection between the two, and that's really crazy. And at first people were like, these guys are on drugs, what they're talking about, the subject and object, and without that, we're kind of screwed, really. But when you realize that events and things are actually intimately tied together, and there's no clear distinction between a consciousness and an event and a thing, you start to look at it differently. And instead of it being this platform with lots of objects all zipping about on it like a computer game, you tend to see it as like a membrane, or like, as I've called it in the past, an ultra soup, where everything really is one thing, but that it's all playing, as Alan Watts, the great British philosopher, used to say, it's kind of like divinity playing hide and seek with itself, pretending it's, the tree's pretending it's not God, but it is really. I'm pretending I'm not God, but I am really. You're pretending you're not God, but you are really. And we evolve slowly through millions of years and gain a sort of greater and greater refinement. Now, if you only have one lens through which to view this incredible ultra soup, then you only see a little part of it. You don't see the tremendous other energetic manifestations that exist. You only see a little bit. And sometimes, nowadays you can get, like I was looking through light amplification goggles last weekend, and just, wow, just incredible sort of, the latest generation military hardware. I was looking through these things, and it was just incredible, seeing things that my eyes have never seen, my naked eyes, as it were, I've never ever seen. And so technology can show you straight away, you know what, there's a lot going on here that we don't usually see. Psychedelics, psychotropic plants, sacred plant medicines, however you want to describe it, these plants that grow out of the ground that have these certain properties, they help us see it as well. And they say, here, if you're struggling with a narrow perspective, if you can't shuffle the pieces around on the chessboard any way and win, then maybe we need to discard the chessboard altogether and do it totally differently. Let me help you do that with this chemical reaction that will temporarily enable you to remove that filter that you got stuck on, your radio dial stuck on that station. Well, let's free that up for a minute and let's have a look in a different way at what's out there. And when you have those experiences, and you can do it quite organically, you never need anything else to do it. What can be achieved with a chemical can always be achieved without a chemical. Once you understand these processes and techniques and you frequently look at the world in different ways, using all these different methods, then your default setting, the way you normally look at the world, begins to shift, and you see more and more happens to you, and your apparent interaction with that world increases, and you get more, it seems to be control, it's not really, but you get more participation in it, and life becomes happier and fuller and more vivid and more interesting. And that's the thing that's wonderful about this. That's where the joy comes in. That's the adventure. That is the spiritual journey, is making contact with this, quotes, ultimate reality.
That actually, I'm really glad that you brought that particular point out, because I did want to kind of focus on that a little bit too, because when people oftentimes think about going on a spiritual path, quote unquote, they have this sort of idea about it as being a very rigorous, very hard and difficult experience that must be adhered to, and there's certain codes and things that you have to follow and a pathway that you have to stay on, and it requires a tremendous amount of work. And I'm not saying that there is no work that is not involved here, but I think it's really important to point out that there really is a joy, a fulfillment, and happiness that can be achieved through this. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that is a very large part of what we should be seeking.
Yeah, it is. The word spiritual puts some people off, so I have to certainly be a little careful using that, because you get with a certain group of guys, say, so what is it you do, Kramer? What are you writing about? What is it you talk about? So, it's spiritual things. They think, oh, right. And they have a view of that, I should say. And think, I'm going to sit there on a cushion kind of like with incense
exactly.
and just reading dusty old books. And that doesn't sound very interesting. The real journey, the real unfoldment is so exciting, it's so cool, it's so deep, so thrilling. There's nothing that compares to it. It is the only game in town, basically. And we have different words. We can say it's spiritual, it's metaphysical, it's the esoteric, it's the mystical path, it's the vision quest, it's the adventure, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. A nice way of saying it is it's Bilbo Baggins, right, daring to go out of his front door from his lovely little village with all the things he could possibly need in it and thinking, you know what, I'm going to go on a different kind of journey, and I'm going to go places I've never been before. And he comes back a different guy, and ultimately he changes the whole world because he's changed himself. And that narrative set forth in Tolkien's work is very, very pertinent to this. It's like, what little me, I can do this. I can have this tremendous, terrific, majestic experience. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Don't ever forget that.
And it's, of course, a huge cliche, of course, but every journey does begin with one step. And,
absolutely. Well said,
I mean, it is. I hate to be cliched about it, but that is the truth. We're going to take our first break now. I want to remind everybody that my guest this evening is Neil Kramer. His website is neilkramer.com, and that's spelled NEILKRAMER.com. We're talking about his book, The Unfoldment, and talking about the process of transformation, enlightenment, and getting in touch with our our inner consciousness and sort of developing a path for spiritual growth for ourselves. And I think a question that I'd like Neil to think about over the break here is, are we dealing with forces that are outside of humanity? And that is what people maybe call angels or demons or, entities from other realms that are impacting our so-called reality here that we have to take into account whenever we're taking our spiritual journey. So when we come back, hopefully Neil will have something to say on that topic. So stay tuned through the break, and we'll be right back with more of the Stench of Truth.
Hi, this is Bill Burns.
And Nancy Burns.
And we're from Future Theater.
We're from the future.
But
even in the future, they're still listening and loving the Stench of Truth.
Friday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern.
On Inception Radio Network.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Hi, this is Jerry Pippin inviting you to join me and Nancy Wallace in Albuquerque, New Mexico on Friday, August 10th at the Albuquerque Marriott for the opening of the second annual Wake Up Now conference. From the 10-minute opening guided meditation to the closing event on Sunday, you will be treated to a journey into awareness that you will treasure for the rest of your life. 60 vendor spaces, 12 major speakers, including Bill Murphy, Brooks Agnew, David Weatherly, Lynn Buchanan, Nick Redfern, and Patty Greer in person, plus a screening of her latest film. Check out all the information by entering Wake Up Now Conference in your search engine or go to the banners on our website at jerrypippin.com. This is a benefit for the Pace-Setting School of Now. We'll see you in Albuquerque.
Hello all, Jamie Havocan here. Let me tell you something if you have not heard. There is a magazine out there. Many say it is the best ufology magazine in the world, and I highly agree. UFO Mag, if you're not a subscriber, please go there. UFOmag.com is the best ufology magazine in the world. Keep up to date on UFO news, subjects, and everything in ufology with some of the best writers around. For Inception Radio listeners only. Usually it's $19.95 for 5 issues. If you mention Inception Radio, you get 6 issues for $19.95. Go there now. UFOmag.com. Tell them Jamie sent you. I'll see you there.
to the Stench of Truth radio show here on the Inception Radio Network. I'm your host, Ted Torbich, and my website is thestenchoftruth.com. You can check out my material there and get linked to everything that you need to know about the Stench of Truth and myself, including my Facebook and Twitter and all that good stuff. And my guest this evening is Neil Kramer, and once again, Neil Kramer can be found at neilkramer.com, NeilKramer, neilkramer.com. We have been talking about his latest book, The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And also I had a word to say about an upcoming conference workshop that Neil is engaged in for August 25th, which you can find at the homepage there at neilkramer.com. And also you can find his links to Facebook and all that sort of thing there as well. So feel free to stop by his site and check out the material that he has and his works and links to many other radio shows that he has done. You can't go wrong by listening. And so prior to the break, I had asked Neil to consider the idea that in our struggles and in our spiritual path and in our desires to grow and engage in this sort of journey of consciousness, if you will, do we have to take into account and deal with forces that are outside just other humans getting in our way? And so what do you have to say about that, Neil?
Well, that is a very fascinating subject, and we could do hours and hours and hours on that. In fact, anyone who really wants to go very deep into this, that's one of the very subject matters that I'll be dealing with at the workshop in August. I have formulated a model of the different dimensions, as most people would call it, or densities or realms, and it's really a sort of distillation of the most accurate spiritual systems that I have come across from various Arabic and European sources. And although there are many different dimensions, if you look at it from a physics point of view, and some physicists would say, well, a dimension infers spatial characteristics, so if that changes, we shouldn't call them dimensions. Although all that stuff's true, let's call them realms for the moment. And I posit that there are 7 fundamental realms, and again, kind of like a rainbow, there's no massive clear distinction between one band or one realm and the other, like red blurs into orange and orange blurs into yellow and so on, that you don't stop suddenly being red and then you're orange. There's actually no distinction between the two. We put those distinctions there for our own practical convenience. So we have these 7 realms, and we're in 3D, the third density, the third dimension. That's where we are. And these realms are characterized by consciousness. So a 1D consciousness might be completely undifferentiated, like an ocean, or a gas, or wind. A 2D consciousness differentiates itself out from that and goes on the start of another kind of journey, a second density journey, like a tree even, or a rock even, or an eagle, okay? And then as you start to differentiate yourself out and become fully self-aware and reflective, then I would say that would classify for me as a third density consciousness, human typically, that's what we would say. Now, when we gain a certain level of enlightenment, of attainment, which is just refinement, just growth, nothing unusual, just you really, really grow over many lifetimes, I feel, not in a karma reincarnation way, I don't see it like that, but in a parallel journey which can encompass many, many lives, and has to some extent, then you will move into a fourth density state where not only are you self-aware, but you kind of achieve a sort of super awareness where your awareness encompasses many different intelligences, many different realities all at the same time, like a deep, deep knowingness that some people sometimes have dreams where they know everything, they sort of uplink to everything, And it's as if you plugged into the big library in the sky, and you kind of know anything that you choose to know. You just direct your attention to it, kind of like in the Matrix movie, and you download it, and there it is. You've got it all. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to learn it. You just got access, direct access to it. And those first 4 realms, densities, are a total natural progression. And they cycle round in some ways as well. It's not strictly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They cycle round. Sometimes you may go back and back and back. Now, for me, studying this quite deeply, and this is going to be expanded upon in a future work, the 4th realm is where polarity ceases to be necessary. So it's still there in the 4th realm, but after that, you don't need it anymore. So if you think what that means, the ultimate teaching mechanism of our world is polarity. It's negative, positive, black, white, pain, pleasure, good, bad, up, down, heat, cold, sun, moon, all those things, male, female, everything. There's this extreme polarization in this world. And to a very large extent, the art of spiritual movement of consciousness is to attain equilibrium, is to reconcile the opposites and find the lesson in that, to integrate them, to understand what is it to be good and what is it to bad, what is it to create, what is it to destroy. And you learn very quickly, if you're smart, that destroying isn't necessarily bad, darkness isn't necessarily bad, cold isn't necessarily bad, and indeed negative isn't necessarily bad. They are, to some degree, necessary for our evolution. They are attractors. They force consciousness to move. They create this kind of reciprocal energy exchange, which gradually means we refine and refine and refine. If everything was bliss all the time, it would be boring. We wouldn't move very far. We would inch forward over millions of years and have no great motivation to do anything. And indeed, if you look at some of the finer fictional expositions on utopian societies, one of the great problems they find is that people drift into decay and decadence and hedonism because they're so goddamn bored of how lovely everything is. And they go around and be naughty on purpose and be evil on purpose. So it's a funny thing. Now, in that 4th density realm, from personal experience, largely, and also having had those experiences, then from studying the materials that our forefathers have left for us, who've studied these esoteric matters, I have seen and detected and outlined a presence of what we would call negative entities, i.e. beings that behave in a very negative fashion consistently. And when you're in that realm, you cannot leave that realm without reconciling your negativity with positive and collapsing the two into one kind of singularity point. You can't do that. That's the whole point of this, is to map polarity fully as a conscious, intelligent, compassionate, loving entity. If you can't do that, you cannot move beyond the 4th realm. So there is an order of entities trapped by their own actions, by their own volition, in that 4th realm. And to exist there, they need a power source, because the universe's clever mechanism of not letting anyone stand still is what we would call entropy. So anyone who knows their thermodynamics knows that eventually everything moves to its own sort of dissolution, really, if it just does nothing. And that's the universe's way of saying, hey folks, you can't stand still. That's the only rule of the game. There's only one, that's it. You've got to keep moving. And these beings know that as well, and they're also subject to that. So they need a power source, and their power source is what we would call negative consciousness, i.e. anxiety, depression, pain. That is a fuel source. It's an electromagnetic emanation, just in the same way as light is or sound is. Yeah? Imagine telling somebody that you could harvest sunlight 1,000 years ago and power a whole building by it. They would have thought you were bonkers. And in the same way, I am suggesting that consciousness can be harvested, can be gathered and used as a particular sort of fuel source. And the way it works is, it has to be, let us say, an octave down from theirs. So you cannot have fourth density consciousness in a third density realm, but you can have an octave down from it, and it has to be negative. So it has to be a certain paranoid, cynical, self-serving, arrogant, violent form of consciousness. And that is very, very well represented in the old hierarchy, in the control system, in this distorted version of the world that is put forward. That's very well represented in that world, and we only need to watch the television and open the newspapers to see how that's represented. That is not accidental. That's not human beings being crap. Human beings are not crap. Human beings are naturally, left to their own devices, pretty amazing, pretty powerful, pretty creative, phenomenal beings with massive potential. And all that's happened is there's been this little sideshow over recent millennia to make them forget that and make them think that they're just these accidental biological machines that have just popped into a cold, horrid world in which nobody really cares about us and we don't really have any influence. And that view has conned billions of people for a long time. And the awakening which you talk about earlier is that con slowly beginning to collapse and dissolve because people are starting to realize that it's not true. But the root of it is not about power or oil. It's not about human beings at all. It's about a certain order of intelligence that has found itself, and you kind of feel sorry for these guys in a way, from a very zoomed out perspective, a certain order of intelligence that has found itself marooned in a fourth density state. They would have to go all the way back to the beginning, snakes and ladders, right back to square one, and start off as a freaking gas or an ocean and start again. And they're not willing to do that because their domain, their dominion, their conscious dominion, their worlds that they have sculpted, their godlike status would be reduced to nothing. And the arrogance of the negative path will not allow them to do that. And so there they are, siphoning off miserable human beings to keep them going. And that's the way I see it. And you can get all frothy about this and worked up and scared or excited, depending on your point of view. But it's only one story in one part of the universe with some human beings. And it's not permanent. It's not a big deal. You have to really zoom out, though, from your own life to say that. If you do it as Ted or as Neil, you can't say that because it is a big deal. But when you zoom out, look at the galaxy, look at the big picture, it's kind of not personal. And I have likened it in the past to the manner in which a whale will drift through the Atlantic with its gob open, sucking in the plankton, because it does that to live and to survive. And it doesn't single out those plankton and say, hey, you little so-and-sos, I'm going to be evil and kill you. It doesn't do that at all. It just opens its mouth and eats them. And in a way, it's a bit like that. It's a little bit like that. And there are precedents for this, and there are people who have talked about this in the past. The Mesoamerican shamanic traditions, particularly South American regions, Mexico, etc., they talk about these entities. The Hopi talk about these entities. Michael Harner, in his book The Way of the Shaman, talks about these entities with, I think, might be wrong on this, the Kanibo Indians, I'm not sure, but a certain Native American indigenous people who discuss these matters. The Gnostics, in a Western Christian sense, have discussed some of these matters and call them the Archons. There are many names for it. Black Wings is a name for them. Some people call them the Anunnaki, is a modern interpretation of this. And there is a distinct mythology, and then we don't mean that it's untrue or fictional when we use that word. We mean a story that passes through many eons of time and has a resonance. That's what a mythology is, in a sense. There is a mythology that's built up around these beings, and again, from a very high-level perspective, a good, healthy perspective. They serve a purpose. They keep the game interesting. They are the sort of Sith Lords, the Dungeon Masters, who keep the drama going. And one of my dear friends has suggested that he even chose to do that and take on this very difficult role to help everyone else propel themselves forward. They'll say, okay, we'll go in this time, we'll go back all the way to the beginning, we'll take the negative path, and we will serve as the figureheads for the evil presence in the universe. We'll play that role. It sucks, but we'll do it, because we know it's an eternal journey, and we know in the end we can all laugh about this together at the end of the day. But we'll do that for now. We will serve as the evil puppets for now. So this whole question depends on your perspective. And the most important element of it is to understand that when you are sovereign, and when you do zoom out, and when you recognize your divinity, nobody's doing anything to you. Nobody is being evil. It doesn't exist. It's not quite like that. That's a very human fantasy. It's not like that. So we have to keep that in mind when we examine this fourth density entity presence, because it is fascinating, and it is important, and it is worthy of our attention. But you need to not get, as you might say, your knickers in a twist over it.
Yes. And I think it's important to actually put it in the terms that you did, Neil. You said it very well. I think that, number one, you don't want to try and categorize things so easily into the moral ideas of humanity, because once you get beyond our third density, as you call it, you cannot put the morals that we have onto other beings, because that would be putting a framework on them that they do not recognize themselves. So saying that something is evil per se or good per se may be totally irrelevant. As you say, they may be just like whales swimming through the ocean, sucking up plankton to eat, and they just happen to eat what they eat. And it's neither good nor bad, quote unquote.
Correct.
Or, on the other hand, even something supposedly evil, according to our, morality that we have as humans, can actually ultimately be a good thing.
Yeah, I think you raise again a very fascinating thing, which is morality, right? Which is something that our fathers and grandfathers and our parents and mothers and goodness knows what have a very strong identification with, I would say, that generation. I do not have any morals whatsoever. I've never felt the need for them, and I've never operated on that basis. In fact, I would say, philosophically speaking, that morality is laziness. It's an extreme form of cop-out of laziness, because if you create a morality system where there is good and evil, whoever you characterize as evil, it all gets very simple then. And all our fine troops, our British and American and Ukrainian and German and Slovenian troops who go out fighting the bad people, the evildoers in foreign lands, that would be really easy, wouldn't it? If that was true, I would go out and fight evil, because that would be dead straightforward. I think, oh, that's what evil is, right? I get it now. Right, give me a gun, I'll go and kill evil, because that's really straightforward. I get that. Unfortunately, from one perspective, and fortunately from another, the world isn't as simple as that. It's not quite like that. It's a little bit more sophisticated and creative than that. And it doesn't take long on your own spiritual journey, particularly the inner journey, to realize that there isn't any evil. There is no good and evil. It doesn't work like that. There are, however, creative acts, and there are destructive acts. And for a being to chronically associate itself with destruction looks an awful lot like evil. When somebody, as they've just done here, some pedophile guy in Oregon just got out, and then he went into school and stabbed a little kid and tried to molest him and stuff. That looks an awful lot like evil, and we can call it evil for shorthand if we like. But when we behave in a philosophical manner, we have to do better than that. we can say, yeah, there's a wrongness in that. Certainly, there is a wrongness in that, in the sense that there's a better way of doing it. That's not a good way of conducting yourself. I have this phrase that I use in the book: there are no bad guys, just disturbed guys. And sometimes you need to take people off the streets when they're very disturbed and keep them off the street, because they're going to hurt themselves or someone else. You have to do that in a civilized society. You have to do that. At other times, certain individuals, when you spot that disturbance early on, you can fix it, and you can help them not be disturbed, and they can be some of the most incredible, amazing human beings you could ever meet. And so you can't differentiate between black and white, good and evil, in the way that Catholic or Protestant moralists might have it. The world doesn't work like that. And as I say, you need only scratch the surface of your spiritual journey to quickly come to that conclusion. And of course, that presents a dilemma, because you think, well, what the hell is there then? And what we have is consciousness and unconsciousness. And unconscious people do stupid things. And that's about as good as it gets. That's about as extreme as you can map that negative polarity. The more conscious people are, the cooler they get, and the more interesting life gets. People who are in a disturbed state do not lead an exciting, satisfying, or gratifying life in any way. It's a miserable, painful, pathetic existence. And I think we have to be very conscious that when you start to work on your inner self, you change your moral framework and you change your ethical outlook on life to something completely different. And I would say that it becomes of a higher order, of more extreme impeccability and much more refined sense of integrity. So the way I conduct myself in this world, I would have, as you might say, a certain code of conduct, and it's very high. It's very, very high. My personal discipline for doing certain things and not doing certain things is really, really high. That bar is up there, and it keeps going higher and higher. Now, no one else might understand what the hell that code is and what it looks like. I certainly wouldn't imagine that I could write it down and say, here you go, Ted, here's your code of conduct, I've written it for you. You know, that wouldn't work, because it's different for everybody. And it's something you discover the deeper you go into yourself. But the effect it has is that the way you comport your consciousness, the way you configure your activities in the world, gets slicker and cooler and more harmonious and more powerful. And the universe knows this damn well, and it will not bestow power, real power, onto people who haven't attained a certain level of integrity in their actions. It doesn't happen. And that's why many of our schools that dealt in esoteric knowledge, particularly in Europe, but all over the world when you go far enough back, that's why they protected it, because they knew that extreme, what we would call magical power, i.e. shaping the 3D realm in accordance with your will, changing the way things work, changing the structure of matter, and changing the physics in the 3D realm, has to lie only with those of great attainment, of great integrity, people you can implicitly have faith in. And that takes thousands of years to get to that stage. So if we go back to our iconic wizard, Gandalf, or Merlin, if you like, that's why they're always old guys. It's showing you not that he's 100 or 300 or 1,000 years old, but that he has been on this journey for a long, long time. And that is when the power comes. You don't get it early on. You can't read a spell book like Harry Potter and wave your bloody broomstick around. That doesn't work, and there's a good reasons for that. So with attainment and with mapping polarity and discovering the point of equilibrium come tremendous power, world-changing power, and it's there in us all the time, but your access to it correlates totally to your growth as a human being, to your spiritual maturity, if you like. And it is philosophical, and it is esoteric, and it is magical. And that's, as you say, you bring out a very important word for this path. That's the joy of it. That's the excitement of it. That's the adventure. That's why it's worth doing in some ways, because it gets more reciprocally expressed, i.e. the world sees you more the more you see it. And then you develop a very intimate relationship with this universe. The more aware you become of yourself, the more the universe can see you, or if you like, the more God can acknowledge your presence. He can say, now I can see you. Now you've cleared away the clouds from your eyes. Now you've jettisoned the nonsense from a destructive mainstream view. Now you've purified your mind and you've become a better man. Now I can see you. I always loved you. I always was with you. But now I can actually acknowledge you. I can see you. I can have a communion with you. And that's that. If that isn't an adventure, I don't know what is.
Yes, that's excellent, and the profundity is something that's very important, and I think that we should talk about that a little bit more. But first, I would like to note and maybe get you to comment on this, that the very idea of a spiritual path and trying to attain some, greater consciousness and the unfoldment, as you call it in your newest book, that kind of presupposes that that people have an inherent goodness about them, and I think this is a very important philosophical point of view, and that is that in a lot of ways we are inundated as a species by this mentality or idea that humans are, fundamentally evil or not good, and that, led to their own devices, whatever, they're just going to destroy and crush everything around them, and they always have wars, and they always fight each other, and they always do this, and they always do that, and that just shows a fundamental, quote-unquote, evil to humanity. But I think that instead, that is a lie that is being foisted upon us, and that can be a hindrance to people even seeking some sort of path to spiritual growth, because if you're inundated in that idea that you're fundamentally bad in some way, then trying to, make yourself into a greater you, then that's just going to spread evil everywhere and make it worse. So, do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching an old science fiction film from the 50s the other day, and like the aliens, the UFOs came down or whatever, and some guys walked out of it, and all the military people just started firing at them, and they pulled out sort of the rifles and just started shooting the place up. And I just kind of laughed and just thought, that sucks so badly, and it's so silly. And I just thought, okay, if I was on a mountainside and a 1950s classical hubcap, UFO comes down, right, and the little ramp comes down and a little guy walks out and waves and goes, hey, the last thing I'd be thinking about doing is killing that entity or shooting or anything like that. I wouldn't really expect anyone who's achieved a certain level of advancement represented in that sort of technology to really struggle with conflict quite in the same way that sometimes we do here on Earth. And I thought about that and I thought, okay, of all the people I know, and I have some brilliant people in my life, thankfully, who else would shoot at, and nobody would. Short answer, nobody that I know would do such a thing. And everybody that I know would also be horrified if an alien craft, and there's a whole thing about, for me, why they wouldn't use craft at all, but that's another subject. But if an alien craft came down and landed in 10 Downing Street or at the White House, on the White House lawn, and said, hey, you guys are apparently the leaders of the free world. Well, we're from Andromeda and we'd like to share some technology and check you guys out and say hello. I'd be horrified. I'd be making a beeline for those places to try and get in front of the aliens and say, listen, please understand, these guys don't represent us at all. They do not represent humankind at all. In fact, these are the worst people you could possibly speak to. But don't you think that any sort of advanced intelligence would already know that? I think they would know that. And I think we don't need to concern ourselves too much about those kind of things. Most people, I walk around in the world a lot. I fly and sail and drive and goodness knows what. I move around this planet quite a lot. Most people I meet, and I mean most people, are really nice. And they're really good. And they've got good hearts. And they're very kind. And they're very civil. And they have a certain conscious articulation that goes beyond language and culture, where we all acknowledge, like, hey, here we all are. You're here, I'm here. Wow, that's amazing. Here we are in the world having this experience. Wow, that's amazing. I don't see many, if you forgive the expression, dicks in the world, stupid people. I don't really see many of them. Now and again, of course, we all do, but not many. And when I do, you can say intuitively, instinctively, in 2 minutes why they're acting like that. And it's usually some sort of pain, some sort of inner emotional trauma. That's what makes people behave badly, inconsiderately, violently, stupidly, whatever. It's pain, emotional trauma. Where those traumas come from is the answer to a lot of our questions, which is passing trauma on, or as I call it in the book, woundedness, is something we have to stop. We have to stop doing that, and we have to stop being repressed, and we have to stop hiding emotional landscape from each other. We have to stop having secrets from each other. Not privacy. Privacy is always important, but secrets. The kind of secrets where it's too difficult so you don't say it. That has to stop. That has to come to an end. So there has to be this total transparency. And when you do that, for first and foremost, it's a hell of a lot easier than one might think. As soon as you have the guts to take that step, it gets a lot easier really fast. When you do that, you realize how cool most people are. And a lot of the problems and the conflict and the concern, particularly the sort of concerns that Republicans and even Democrats to some extent put forth, which is we either have order or we have chaos, that ridiculous, infantile dichotomy vanishes. Human beings do not behave chaotically left to their own devices. They don't. They behave harmoniously. They get on. They do stuff together. Now, when you have a lot of disturbed people, if you live in a town that was ravaged by an industrial collapse 20 years ago, like it was all brilliant in the 70s and 80s, and then in the 90s, industry failed, manufacturing failed, the whole city's just a shithole, if you pardon the language, and many members of that society are drifting into ignorance, and many members of that society are turning to crime to put bread on the table, then you've got a problem. Then you have got a problem. Too many people in an ignorant place is always a bit of a recipe for trouble. You've got problems then. And that's where they focus a lot of people's fears on. But when you have a stable population, and when you have a good mix of indigenous peoples, of visitors, of foreigners, of cultures, of ethnicities, when that mix is right, and it doesn't always mean it's massively multicultural, that can be disastrous in some places. In others, it can work very well. The mix is right depending on the land and the people and the history. When that's right, but first and foremost, the actual number of people, that's very important. When that's right, people get on. People identify problems and resolve them. We are troubleshooters by nature. When things happen, we look at it, we address it, we deal with it. And that is something that I think is very important to emphasise, that it isn't all doom and gloom. It's not people running around with pump action Remingtons blowing each other's head off in Mad Max world. That's nonsense. That's a society that's already lost decades ago. If that happens, then we've already lost. But that isn't what I see. And I have lived in New York for a year, in upstate New York. I've lived in Portland, Oregon. I've visited about 30 states here. I've visited every major city in Europe, certainly in Western Europe, many in Eastern Europe. I've lived in the UK for 35 years. I know London, I know Birmingham, I know Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh, Glasgow. Most places I see the people have strong, true hearts and behave well. And the only problems I see tend to be propagated from political angles, not from human angles. So I think we have to be very clear on that. Human beings are good, and we do the right thing most of the time. And that just needs saying, basically, because as you say, Ted, I think we can forget that all too easily. And, one of my favourite humorists, Bill Hicks, did once describe human beings as a virus with shoes. So I know what he's saying there. And when you look at the worst of humanity and you watch shows like, where the cops are just arresting drunk people, and, I was in Las Vegas recently and saw some very, very amusing expressions of human consciousness, then you might scratch your chin and think, yeah, what's going on there, But you have to have a broad view, and you have to balance that with other communities and villages and towns and peoples and culture and art and music and love and sharing, and realize that you have to look across the spectrum and say, well, let us say on average what's going on here. And when you do that, it usually works out really well.
Thank you for that, Neil. That was well said. And I think it's very important for people to keep that in mind, especially in light of the way things are now. And I think that, I think that we get a lot of the mentality that we have about human beings and everything else that is being fed to us, as you noted quite rightly earlier on, through the media and through the fearmongers and the doom and gloomers and all this sort of thing. And they feed into that mentality, because when we see all of the evil leaders being evil, quote unquote, and doing their quote unquote evil things, and talking about all the negativity that surrounds us in this 3D world that we live in, we can lose sight of that and very easily fall into the trap of thinking that, humans are basically evil. And I don't think that that's a proper thing to do. But a term that we do hear a lot of is this idea about waking up. And you hear a lot of doom and gloom people talking about, you people need to wake up. Everybody needs to wake up and face reality and see the way things are. But, I don't look at it from a wake-up point of view like some people in alternative media might say, that we need to look at the conspiracy of the secret societies and the underlying political, machinations that are going on here, the shadow plays and all this sort of thing. I look at it as more of a waking up in the sense that Gurdjieff talked about, and that is the idea of realizing that you're walking around sleepwalking, basically, living in a totally unconscious state. And when you open your eyes from that state, it's entering into your true consciousness. It's a totally different thing.
It is a totally different thing, and for many people, that's exactly why they don't do it. They choose to remain asleep because it's too weird, it's too hard, and nobody can help explain what is that's happening to them. Our spiritual teachers are few and far between. To the people who have confidence in knowing what is occurring and have experience and wisdom of how to communicate that, they're few and far between. So when people glimpse that opening and that deeper, truer reality, most people turn away from it. They turn right around and think, oh my God, that is so odd, so weird. So many things would have to be rewritten, rewired, reprogrammed in my own life that, forget it. I'll stick with the wrestling and the Doritos.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're going to take our last break right now. Again, everybody who's tuning in, my guest this evening is Neil Kramer. And we have been talking about consciousness and spiritual development, and talking about his book, The Unfoldments, which has the subtitle, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And we've been talking about some collateral subjects as well that deal with this. So when we come back, I think we will talk about synchronicity a little bit, and we'll talk more about the profundity of engaging on that spiritual level, and how much of an attractive thing that is for us, or how attractive it could be if we decide to look in that direction, rather than thinking, as I noted earlier, this sort of idea about, gurus, and as Neil said, sitting on a futon with incense burning around, reading like old scrolls and things like this until you get old with a long white beard that you never cut off. That instead this can lead to joy and understanding and real fulfillment in your life. And I think synchronicity is one way and one tool by which not only the universe communicates with us, and if you want to call that the divinity, then that's fine too. That's a term that I'm perfectly comfortable with. But also just the spiritual pathway itself and the profundity of it. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we come back from this break. So stay tuned through the break, and we'll be right back with more of the Stench of Truth with Neil Kramer.
Hi, this is Bill Burns.
And Nancy Burns.
And we're from Future Theater.
We're from the future.
But
even in the future, they're still listening and loving the Stench of Truth.
Friday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern.
On Inception Radio Network.
Hello all, Jamie Havocan here for MJ'sHealthyWay.com. Are you into vitamins, nutritions, meal replacements, and keeping yourself, your internal engine going? If so, I have the perfect place for you, and that is MJ'sHealthyWay.com. They offer the best service, and they will tell you everything you need and want to know about a certain product. I get my vitamins and meal replacement shakes from MJ's Healthy Way, but there is so much more on the website which you can order. Check it out, MJ'sHealthyWay.com.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty landline or cell phone and dial or call and listen lines at 832-280-0830 or 786-837-2262 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, those numbers are 832-280-0830 or 786-837-2262. For the Inception Radio Network, I'm MJ.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Human
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stench of Truth radio show here for the final segment. And I would like to remind everybody that my guest this evening is Neil Kramer, once again, writer, philosopher, and teacher. You can find him at neilkramer.com, NeilKramer.com. And we have been talking about his latest book, The Unfoldment, and Path to Transformation, Enlightenment, and Spiritual Growth. And prior to the break, I had asked Neil to talk about synchronicity and how we can look at spiritual growth and getting in touch with our consciousness and that spiritual pathway as being a very profound thing. And I had used synchronicity as an example because it is one of the most powerful things that people can experience in their lives. And when you do experience these things, they can serve as a learning experience for people who are kind of timid about engaging in anything quote unquote spiritual because they have that, that idea about what it entails. But instead it can be very profound and it can have incredible meaning and resonance in your life. So Neil, if you will.
Yeah, synchronicity is a very wonderful thing, and for those of people who are not perhaps quite familiar with that word, it just really means a meaningful experience, apparently, that is totally coincidental. So you walk down the street, you're thinking of your best friend Bill, and hey-ho, there he is, and you see him in a crowd of 1 million people, and there's Bill, and he walks right up to you. That's a synchronicity. Now, from a reductionist point of view, i.e. those who believe that the universe is just essentially a big piece of clockwork, synchronicities will come along now and again, and we call them coincidences, and there's no particular meaning to it. It's just like, well, statistically, you are going to bump into Bill now and again, and statistically, you are going to find somebody reading the same book as you on the train now and again. And of course, we kind of brought up to think that way. When you start to study metaphysics, spirituality, the esoteric, you start to come across the idea that everything is connected to everything else, and at a very fundamental level. And as I said earlier, the quantum physicists, of course, are reminding us of this again. There isn't really a clear division between one thing and another thing. That doesn't exist. So everything, when you look at it at a certain level, is absolutely fused together with everything else. And the only thing that creates distance really is the mind. There is no distance, there is no hot and cold, there is no colour. It doesn't work like that. So we have this kind of undulating fractal membrane which we describe in a certain way as soil and trees and buildings and glass and metal and ceramics and all these different things. But really, that's just a description. It doesn't really look like that when you actually look at it. And there isn't a separation between the building I'm sat in now and the tree which I'm looking at over the way. There's no distinct distance between us. So when you get over that, and some people need a bit of persuading with that, which is fair enough, so go and look at that to whatever level you wish. And there are some fast and dirty methods of doing that, but we won't describe them on the airwaves. When you come to that knowing that everything is connected, that rather gives a different set of parameters to what synchronicity is, what coincidence is. Because you think, well, if everything's connected to everything else, then potentially there is no random coincidental events at all. They all have meaning, because the sort of substrata, the stuff that connects everything, what we call space, isn't really space. It's this tremendous energetic potential, this kind of what people nowadays call the 0 point field, this magical ether which enfolds all of us, is always communicating all the other bits of intelligence from everywhere else. And in fact, that intelligence is embedded in this space, in this ether, in this oneness all the time. So really, synchronicity is an indication that you are becoming very aware of your place in the world to a profound level. And when you do that, a nice way to say it, which I'm rather fond of, is to say the universe can see you. And if you're of a religious persuasion, God can see you. It's a nice way of saying it. And what it means is that your consciousness has reached a level where it can receive the signals that were always there, but you didn't used to pick up on them. And now you are doing this. What seems to happen is that synchronicity, fortuitous, serendipitous events that have a happy connection to the way you're thinking at any moment in time increase. More and more magical synchronicities pop up all over the place because your consciousness, your radar on top of your head has grown in its sophistication, and it's picking up more and more and more. And the depth of signal and the fidelity of that signal, the strength of that resonance is also increasing. So you can interact with the world at a much greater level. So at a very practical level, what that means is that when synchronicity increases, it's an indication that your consciousness is deepening very nicely. And really, it's sort of as simple as that. And you can push it. You can push that synchronicity out, and you can turn your radar on, a little bit like if you walk into a restaurant with your radar on. You become super conscious of everything, and you see people, what this guy's wearing, where the bar is, where the restroom is, oh, this is a table, oh, there's a nice booth over there, that'd be a nice place to sit, what the smell is, what shoes somebody's got on. You can turn your sort of Sherlock Holmes radar on big style, or you can walk in chatting to your friend and just not even really be at all aware of where you are, or what colour the wallpaper is, or what the floor is. Is it floorboards? Is it carpet? Is it tiles? Don't know. What are people wearing? Don't know. What they're talking about? Don't know. Not interested. So we choose, and both of those things are good, we choose what we focus on. And when you focus on your inner growth, your capacity to pick up on the constantly communicating ether, if you will, to use that rather Victorian term, increases. So you see more, you develop more, and that's what psychic people are doing essentially. They're tuning in to the sort of ultranet, the organic ultranet of the universe, to say, gosh, there's all this stuff going on all the time, and I've just realised that I can turn on this kind of Wi-Fi in my brain. It's actually your heart where that's located, but I can turn this aerial on in my system and pick up on it and see things and connect events together. And the reason synchronicity increases is because you're also broadcasting a signal. You're not just receiving anymore. You are now broadcasting, and you can only do that when your consciousness is at a certain level, which is why ordinarily coincidence is very infrequent, because usually we're caught up in the hubbub of everything, in the turmoil of daily life, and we don't think clearly. We're not really in a position to receive any signals. When you work on yourself, when you clarify what you're doing and who you are, what it's all about, you begin to purify your consciousness. It's rather just the same as getting an old clay pot and giving it a good clean out and cleaning that vessel out so it would be fit to drink water from. So you don't want to do it, it's got all dirt and crud and grime and dead crabs in it or whatever. You clear that thing out. You purify it in a very simple sense, not in a moral sense. In a very simple sense, you purify the vessel of your mind. So the stuff that comes through it, you can actually process properly. And that's when we start to broadcast our own signals, and the universe can hear us as well. And then we have this beautiful thing, which we call synchronicity now, which is where events in the world take on much more meaning, and the connection and the apparent randomness flip around. Randomness decreases and connection increases.
Yes. And the synchronicities that people come across, and as you say, in the working with yourself and your advancement in your spiritual quest, as it were, to use those terms, which, obviously our language lacks in some ways, because everything comes with a certain amount of baggage. But the way I look at it too is because when you notice synchronicities and when you decide that you are going to look for them, then obviously, yes, it's just exactly like you said. It's like you're turning on a radio yourself and you're putting that message out there that's saying, hey, I'm looking for some help here. I'm looking for some things to happen.
Exactly.
And they're going to come your way. You know what's an interesting thing for me to think about, Neil, is how many synchronicities your actions every day cause other people around the world.
You know, if you want to know the answer to that question, then there is a fabulous book, admittedly, that I have contributed to, called the Sync book, right? And
Yes.
it's put together by a super guy called Alan Green and 26 writers on synchronicity and synchromysticism, as we sometimes call it, got together and produced this book. And it's very, very fascinating. As far as I know, it's the first book specifically to deal with this subject from a mystical, philosophical and spiritual point of view, and it's very, very fascinating book. And yes, I contributed an essay to it, but boy oh boy, those other 25 things that I read from people, some of whom I knew nothing of, fascinating read. What a great book. Get that book, the Sync book.
That's also linked up on your website too, I believe.
Yes, it is, but yeah. It really is a truly very, very enlightening read, and pioneering as far as I know, in that I've never seen such a collection anywhere else ever on this topic from the perspective that we're talking about. You know, people will talk about chance and randomness and all those things, but this particular treatment of it is unique.
Yes, and I've heard great things about the Sync book, and I've heard some talks with Alan Green.
Alan Green,
right?
yeah.
Alan Green.
Alan
is the one that
Aberdeen
put it
Green,
together.
that's right.
Yeah, and yes, absolutely. This is very fascinating, and of
It's
course,
nearly as good as the Unfoldment, you know.
well, naturally, I would expect nothing else.
Yeah.
But so in the last few minutes here,
Mm-hmm.
Neil, perhaps I think it might be instructive for people who are listening who say, hey, that Neil Kramer, he sounds like he has, something, his message is important. And it's something that I really think is something that I want to try to pursue. Can you give us a couple of things that we can do, besides getting your book, which is probably a really good idea, so that you can, have a sort of really basic kind of framework and idea. And so definitely get the Unfoldment. But if you were to, just sit down with people who are just saying, you know what, that guy has a really great idea. Just what kind of steps can I take if I'm just starting out and I really want to try and get in touch with my inner self, my consciousness, and I want to try to take some steps on that spiritual path?
Well, the Unfoldment really is a simple choice, and it's a choice to take yourself seriously. It's a choice to say, my presence in the world is not accidental, it's not insignificant, and quite the reverse, it's very consequential, and I may indeed even have this tremendous power. And I think that's something that right from the get-go you need to be conscious of and think, well, that sounds pretty interesting. As soon as you start to make those decisions and those choices, you realize that your consciousness is very, very powerful. And it's not something necessarily that you generate from your brain. I don't feel that way at all. I think it's something that you pick up on. Like we said, it's like a signal. And you receive it, you can interpret it, and you can broadcast it. You can rebroadcast it, shall we say. And you understand that it becomes important how, I've used this word once or twice, how you deport yourself spiritually. And this doesn't mean any airy-fairy, woo-woo, new age guff. This means being a warrior when the time is right, being an artist when the time is right, being compassionate, loving, insightful, creative, true. So all those nice things that we do quite well, actually, they become particularly important. And it means you have to know yourself intimately. There can be no unknown areas in the Unfoldment, no blocked emotions, no weak triggers. You have to go in deep to balance yourself in this way. And so, I mean, the book is the best way of distilling all these things and saying, look, if you really want a crash course in this stuff, this is what I would give to my dearest friend. And look, this is just my view. It might be like flawed, but it's the best I can do. Here is my distillation of it. And so that book essentially shares many of my perspectives on different ways of looking at ourselves in the world, about our emotions, our families, media, politics, mystery, anomaly, ultra-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, crop circles, the whole gambit, the whole thing. All those diverse things have a connection. All of those things represent our engagement with the world, and some of them are dead prosaic and normal about our lives and how we interact with each other. That's really important. If that's not right, you're not going to have any ultra-terrestrial contact. You have to raise your game to have these special, profound, deep experiences. That's kind of what they're for, to tempt you as a reward, to say, look, if you sort yourself out, if you be true, if you change your attitude to be more empowered and full of integrity, which we all start from that position in a way, but we have to remember these things. If you can do that, then this world becomes much more fabulous in a very true sense of that word. And each chapter in the book is basically a contemplation on key areas of this process, things that I definitely feel are worthy of everybody's attention, and they're just very interesting, period. And so I always insist on bringing the big mysteries of the universe into the little mysteries of our own private lives, what we do, who we're with, how we are. And so often the practicalities in the book are expressed in looking at the connection between our own inner world and the outer world. So emotions play a very big part in that, and there's a whole section dedicated to that. Clearing yourself from blockages, from jealousy, anxiety, fear, distrust, nervousness, paranoia, all those things are dealt with specifically to say, look, these things are symptoms of something else. Let's go to the root of it. Let's go to the root of why those things come about. Let's really, really decide for ourselves that we're going to make ourselves something different. So you can't take this book into your hands and just rearrange the furniture a little bit. What it's really saying to you is, look, if you're ready to totally change the lot, to become something different, to become something really like a massive catalytic sort of shift from the pupae to the caterpillar to the butterfly, that's a normal journey. You're going to do it anyway, but some people want a bit of guidance with that and need a little bit of inspiration. And I, on my journeys, the only thing that's peculiar about me in this respect is that I've spent a lot of time on this, more time than most people will ever do, because I've made this personal commitment to myself to do it. And along the way, you do find things that are kind of universal. Most of them are old things. They're not mine at all. They're things I've dug up, as it were, and said, wow, look at this. This is pretty awesome. This can help us. This can help us be stronger and better and feel more comfortable about ourselves in the world. And if you go to the root of it, some Hindu guy said it 5,000 years ago, and some Atlantean entity said it 20,000 years ago, and you're like, oh, well, it's not really new at all. What's new about the book, though, of course, is that it's now. It's our language in this 21st century paradigm, with the politics, with the culture, with the phenomena that are cropping up all around the world, with the fascinating cultural shifts that we're experiencing at the moment. And that's what's unique about this. It's this frame in this moment with these people right now, right in your own home, right in your own heart, right in your own bed. This is it. And the book is absolutely bringing it right into your own life. So the practicalities of that, you have to determine for yourself. You have to express for yourself. I will suggest things in the book, but it's very clear that it's not just to talk about mystery and to talk about phenomenal, interesting things that might titillate us for the evening before we just forget them again. It's proposing to the reader, do you really want to go on an adventure? Because if you do, when you come back from it, you'll be different. And if you're okay with that, then let's go for it. If you're not, put it down. And that is the proposition that the book makes. So it's quite a profound one, and it's quite radical. And newcomers, I've written it specifically so anybody can pick it up. But advanced students, people who've been doing this for a while, who kind of get it, they will also find new things in it, because always the story is new. Every time the oak tree grows, we've seen it before, but it's always unique, it's always new, it's always pertinent to the moment it's in. And that, again, is reflected in this book. So it is empowering. It is an empowering book. I'll put my hand up and, proclaim that. I think it is empowering. Everyone who's read it, who's come back to me, has said, wow, I have found greater power after reading this and listening to some of these things. And if nothing else, I'll tell you what, I really mean it. It might not be perfect. There might be little cracks in it here and there, but I mean it. And I think people respond to that. If somebody really means it, you can tell, and that has a certain power in it.
That's absolutely true, and I get that feeling from you very much. And of course, when I'm here doing my radio show, I have people on that I want to talk to because I'm genuinely interested in what they have to say, because I believe that they are honest brokers of what they can bring to the game. And I think it's very important for people to have access to knowledge from people who have a diverse field of expertise, and people who have delved very deeply into the subjects in which they're interested, and bring us a perspective that is very unique to them, but also is potentially very empowering. And that is one of the reasons why I had you on the show today.
Well, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely. It was fantastic. And now I'm going to wrap this up by telling you all once again that my guest this evening was Neil Kramer. And you can find him at neilkramer.com, and that is neilkramer.com. And you will see right on the main page there his latest book, The Unfoldment. There's a picture there. If you click on that, it'll take you to another page which will give you a little bit of a precious about the book itself, and then you can order from several different places directly from his website. It's very easy to do that. And also, if you're interested in the workshop that he has coming up in August, there is also a link to that as well. And when you click on that, that is near Hood River in Oregon on August 25th, 2012 to, that's from Saturday to Sunday, August 26th, 2012. And that will give you a breakdown of what is going to be happening there. And you can also get booking information and details by using a email link that is right there for you to do so. And also, as he said, there's also the sync book that he contributed to. I'm sure a lot of other people have heard about this book and are very excited about it. I am as well, and I've heard a lot of good things about it. And he has an essay that he contributed to the sync book as well. And that is by Alan Abedesser Green, and you can find a link to that from his website as well. And you can also look for that separately if you would like to. But Neil Kramer has given us a good bit to chew on today, I think, with synchronicity, and also with getting in touch with our inner consciousness and developing ourselves on a spiritual path that will bring us to a better future, not only for ourselves individually, but that will automatically transfer, I think, into a better world for all of us to live in, and trying to see outside of the 3D realm in which we live and get a broader, bigger picture of what's going on in the world around us. Neil, do you have a new project that you're working on right now, or anything of other interest that I did not touch on?
Well, I'm always writing, so I'm always writing ready for the next project, so that's always going on. I'm always teaching as well, or coaching, or whatever you want to call it, so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. So I spend time with people, they visit me, I visit them, and we exchange and we teach each other and share this knowledge together. There's always so many projects going on. I've also got a new audio project which is going to be coming out in the spring, which seems a long way away, but that'll be here before we know it. So yeah, there's always stuff going on. I mean, Facebook is kind of rubbish. I know we all kind of know that deep down, but in terms of sharing information on these things, there is like a page, Neil Kramer Facebook page, which you can get to from the site. So if anyone's interested in what I'm doing and what I'm up to, you can always kind of get a view on it from there, which again is linked to from neilkramer.com.
Wonderful. And when you click the teaching link there at the top of the page, it will tell you a little bit about what he would do, and you can contact him and find out more about how you can actually get some wisdom from Neil Kramer. So that's wonderful that you get in touch with people personally. But we're flat out of time right now. I'd like to extend a very warm thanks to Neil Kramer for joining us today. And also thank Big Feet for producing for us here at Inception Radio. And I'd like to invite you all to come back next week on the 13th, where I will have Peter Robbins, and we'll be talking about the incidents there in the UK at the Bentwaters base, and the UFOs and all the other weirdness that goes along with that. So join me next week with Peter Robbins, and I'll see you next time.
Just a drop of rain, would it lead you back to the day you lost the war? I don't mean to bring you down before tomorrow, but I need to lead you there before we've lost the sun. I don't mean to bring you down tomorrow, but I need to take you there before we've lost our world. They all need to know if the secrets you share are carved in stones. They all need to know if the people out there are not alone. Hold stillness, my heart has been Nigerian sunlight. Can promise you when we're done, you won't remember a thing. Nigerian sunlight, you'll never recall what we've done. If I told you that my savior was a man who made my hands with a woman that you claim should have no souls, on the breast I laid my father when my mother had no plan to give us back to the one who gave us love. I don't mean